Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Every week, I, Bill Correll, and some of my closest friends on the planet get together to have a little bit of a chat. Always kind of questing for empowerment. Like, what is it? How does it work? Why do people need it? How come everyone doesn't know they need it? All of those things, all those really cool questions that come up. But I think mostly we talk about the day-to-day challenges, like what it is to be a human being and bump into yourself all over the place, while trying to figure out how to just finish the day up and get prepared for tomorrow. Um, I have a special guest this week. He's fast becoming, like I said, one of my favorite people on the planet. And I'm going to say a couple of things about you because I want people to know that you're far from a trivial guy in a diner type of a speaker. You've done some amazing research in a lot of different areas. The subject of being, ontological conversations, spirituality, the energy and vibrations and all of that sort of thing. So when I listen to you speak, I learn something every time you open your mouth or you publish something on Facebook. So it's a pleasure to have you here. With that said, everybody join me in greeting Austin Jacob.
Bill, I didn't. I really was expecting you to talk about somebody else. Wow, that touches my heart. Thank you, sir.
You're a good man, Charlie Brown, and I'm really glad you're around.
I mean, and you really spilled the beans on what it is that we're doing. And when I say we, I mean you, I, everyone, all in the same boat here, trying to figure out what does this life mean? Who am I, and why am I here? And pursuit for another day of this grand living, this grand remembering that we're all doing.
Yeah, and the really neat part of it is that if you hang out with the right people and you get off track in your life, it's easier to get back on track with other people who can say, perfectly fine what you're doing. However, tomorrow when you look back on it, will you feel like you've spent the day, the best way you possibly can? Or maybe would you like a hand up here for a moment? Maybe we can get you looking at things slightly different so that instead of significantly pining away for the rest of the day, maybe you can chuckle a little bit and say, all right, so that didn't work, now what, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, those are some of the best of my friends are my family, and quite vice versa also. But when I think of a friend, a good friend to me is somebody who can mirror without judgment, mirror without expectation, can hold space without certainty, can hold space without definity. Those are the ones that they grow with you, shoulder to shoulder, instead of, well, this is what works for me, or just kind of like fueling the fire of the gossip, if that were the case, or fueling the lower self-talk. People who can just be with you shoulder to shoulder. I mean, I could go on to say it a million different ways, but in its simplicity, We are not in the universe is with us. When we look at somebody else, we're looking at a mirror reflection of something brought that to our attention. Yes, they are their own individual, and as are you, but there's always there's always more. There's always more.
Yeah. Well,
And
I
a
love
good
a
friend
couple
will
of,
reveal that.
excellent, excellent. So not only are we a drop in the ocean, but we're the ocean in a drop.
There it
And
is.
you used a couple of, and folks, you might want to let that sink in for just a moment, because every particle, every um, faint trace of flotsam and jetsam that happens to be in that ocean, it's in every single drop. It's holographic. Have you ever had occasion to take a holograph where it's like a 3D image that you can see and you can turn it, and then the individual or the subject matter turns as well. But if you hit it with a hammer and you break it, each of the little tiny shards has the entire image of what was in the original hologram. It's really uncanny, but it also tells you why life isn't about learning how to change a little bit from this to that, but that the real good stuff, the gold, the cookies, that all comes with being adept at transformation. And transformation, just to give you an example, is what a caterpillar goes through to become a butterfly. There's no information, according to Bucky Fuller, um, in a caterpillar that would ever predict that it's going to be a butterfly. You can't look at a caterpillar and say, yeah, you're going to be a beautiful butterfly. It's not like that. It's almost like cookie dough in the bowl. Toll House cookies don't look like very much. Although I guess there's been a fad to people just eating cookie dough too. But
Guilty.
so the one thing that you said that, and actually there were two terms that I think are definitely worth expanding on and saying. In other words, the term mirroring. I hear many people use that in day-to-day conversation, and there's some others that they use pretty frequently too. But there's a lot of power in that word when you and I use it. I mean, we're actually talking about playing back for someone exactly how they are showing up in the world, adding nothing and taking nothing away. And that's not something that is easily done. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of training, and it takes a really huge commitment, to be of service to other people. And the whole idea of being a mirror is to give people back in their own generative fashion what they're sending out into the world in a way that they can receive it, as opposed to interpreting it and giving them back an interpretation in other words. Does that sound like a working def to you?
No, absolutely. The one of the fascinating, well, I find this fascinating everything. Owning the whole absolution alchemist here. When we focus on like a word and this mere one, I've heard it used subjectively, I've heard it used objectively, I've
Right.
used it in my own understanding, and all truths are true. So the framework here of what you said ties in with, say, our container, which is empowerment,
Yeah.
because it is more like so objectively, we're all doing it.
Right.
Subjectively, it can be skilled, it can be grown, it can be a great lead in for service. And what I love that you kind of tied in without saying it, I'll say it in just another way, is when you almost, how can I say, steal away someone's empowerment. In other words, when you're not effectively mirroring, or when you're not consciously mirroring, I should say, there are parts of that are taking that awareness from the person. You're almost forcing a breakthrough or forcing an opinion, forcing a aha moment, and taking that sovereign, oh, I'm the one who gets to do this. We use absolution in language to help express the same thing. Essentially, I believe that us as humans, we want to help people, and yeah, I lost my train of thought with that. So some of some other things that I wrote down. I love how you threw in cookies. I always call them nuggets. Like I'm
Yeah.
dropping nuggets here, dropping nuggets here. Those are my wisdom nuggets. So cookies is a good one too. And then early on, you mentioned about fractal. And now that's a deep subject, and I love getting to that. When I think of fractal realities, I think of geometry and infinity and its polarity of absolution, and just they're unconceivable things. Ergo, there's a lot to perceive within them.
Right.
And then the other thing about the butterfly, I have heard that analogy for 30 years, and probably about every 5 years, the whole entire meaning changes. Did you know that butterflies, if you actually, nature included, and us, if we were to try and help a caterpillar or whatever in its larva, it wouldn't survive. It wouldn't be able to spread its wings. That process, that like the lotus, going through the mud and just being with it.
Yeah.
There's a structure, or rather, I should say, there is an order behind it that actually allows it to then fly, not just come out of the cocoon and, oh, this is my reality. I didn't make it in the cocoon. No, no, no. That's the whole process. It's all in one thing. So
Yeah.
powerful nuggets, my friend.
Yeah. The act of breaking through the shell of the chrysalis, and then forcing through the opening of the chrysalis, actually pumps blood and liquid into the wings that has
Okay.
them grow and expand. And if that didn't happen, that butterfly will never fly. Those wings will never, there'll never be another event where they can recreate that instant where it actually becomes a flying insect. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's a lot like us. If you water it down any one particular moment, it's like all of that process in one moment. You have the opportunity to work with it and come out something different. But you also have the opportunity not to, because we're afforded the feminine energy of softly and nicely repeating the lesson, what is right for our soul's journey. At least that's how I view it. Always there to humbly remind us.
Yeah. And what I love about what you're saying is when we describe transformation to human beings, we have to, you know, juxtapose those definitions and those examples to what would be a normal process. Like, but for example, the amount of time that it takes to bake a chocolate chip cookie is a lot longer than it takes, um, for a moth or a butterfly to get out of the cocoon or chrysalis. However, it's the same thing. That it's changing the form beyond essence. There's no going back to what it was before. And one of the other words that we always seem to hear hand in hand with transformation is paradigm shift. The interesting part of what has happened in our language on a daily basis is that paradigm shift, is in many conversations is like, I got to work, a raise at work today. Well, I think that's not using a valuable word correctly. When if you were to say that someone came and tapped you on the shoulder today at your job in the engineering department and said, "We are going to we're going to put you on television for millions of people to see you, and not only that, we're going to pay you $25 million per episode, and this is going to be a 3-year contract." Transformation is more like that shift than it would be to stay at your engineering drafting table and get a 30% increase in pay. So there's something that gets changed that once it's happened, you can't go back to the old way. It doesn't exist any longer. So, I mean, that's neat. The other thing that you came out with, which was, you know, it's such a powerful vessel for holding so many different things at the same time, and the word actually holding space. That particular um, word combination is so powerful because it can't be duplicated physically. It can only be understood spiritually, mentally, and metaphysically. The actual holding space has nothing to do with any solid object. It has everything to do with being the caregiver, caretaker, steward of another person's persona for a period of time so they can safely explore whatever it is that they're having trouble with. Is that a good way to say it?
Yes, holding space is a I could say it with every word, but keeping it simple here. With the mirroring,
Yes.
there's almost like levels to the understanding of what it means. But like you, I do hear it colloquially, if that's the right word, kind of tossed around, maybe misused or misunderstood in the context clues of how it might have been used. It's understood, how it's being delivered, but stepping further out, it can, like any word, that word is going to mean something different. Definition aside from it. So I wrote down here increasing capacity. That's very similar to how I see being able to hold space. Increasing your own capacity for, let's call it, why are you gone? Okay. For conscious thinking. Like, what's another good analogy? If you show up the best version of yourself, you're enabling and empowering other people to do the same, to see the same. We've talked on this podcast actually before about a powerful way to empower our children is teaching them how to think, not what to think. The definitions are already available to them to pick up, to define, and a great way to, oh, well, how do I teach someone how to think? You show them. This is, it's not something that can necessarily be like power. Power is only given. Okay, that's not a good example, but well, power is only given, not taken. But think of an experience. An experience can't be given or taken or logically understood. It can only be experienced. And these are all just analogies here. But that really leaned into the earlier statement about you didn't call it these two, but the two I wrote down was a quantum leap and a spiritual awakening. And the way I look at those is you almost, sometimes they're traumatic, sometimes, but other times, I've had them occur where, okay, so common denominator amongst all of them is when you, let's call it, return to whatever timeline you then chose at that point, you can't unring the bell. The way you are perceiving and seeing the world, analyzing information, tuning in, all the things is different. And while you can use gray matter and revisit, going forward is never going to be the same. And I think people like to use the word shift in these because that's a easier way to describe not like before.
Right.
But just like the other with the mirroring and the holding space, it can be like most things in depth of a conversation. You just show up the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And I do think that there are certain things in conversation that in order for them to have power, and I think where you were going with this is that power is one of those things it's a community phenomenon. It is actually, along with leadership and other types of ideal things that occur in language but get demonstrated and acted out between groups of people, not just a person or not even just one person and another person. There isn't necessarily power when there's only two people. There's something going on there, but power comes from the ability to act or not and have the end result occur, which is much different than force.
Yeah, absolutely.
Force requires an extraordinary amount of effort in the face of no result. That's what force is. Force is when people don't act in their own best interests and ultimately, in many cases, act to their own detriment. But power is a different deal entirely. Power is kind of like when a room full of babies starts giggling. One kid starts giggling, and then 5 minutes later, all of them are giggling over nothing. Okay, and you couldn't stop them if you tried. That's that thing that just happens almost with their autonomic systems. It's like when somebody starts yawning, in a room. Have you ever noticed that? And another person does, and another person. So that is more in the area of power. And force is trying to stop those babies. Good luck with that.
Yeah. I mean, since we're on this rift with the words, power is another one that, depending on its context, how you're using it, what subject are you referencing it to, what came to mind, an interesting way, one of many faceted ways to look at power is, if you think actually there was a test once, I don't know the name, but they had people sit in a room, like 7 of them, or maybe 12, who knows, and they had one come in and he had specific order to stand. So they had a room full of chairs, and one person would go in the chair and he'd sit. And if he heard the bell, he'd stand up. If he heard the bell again, he'd sit down. Every time he heard the bell, he got up, sat down. And they did a couple of different room studies where they had people, tested humans, who didn't know what was going on, how they would react to this one person doing it. And believe it or not, they found we act what we see. And so to tie this in with, I know I'm not doing very well, but to tie this in with power, one way to look at power, from my statement of you can give it away, but it can't necessarily be taken from you.
Right.
Think of, if you're in a room and you have a thought, you're at work and you have a thought, and the thought is, oh, that person looked at me so ugly, I bet they are thinking X, Y, and Z. At that moment, the power is almost, these are all analogies, but the power is like localized. You are holding it. Now, the minute you go and share it to somebody else, not only are you giving your power away, but then there's typically a return of power, someone else giving their power away, and it reinforces. So now that thought becomes a story. And eventually, as things are going, that story becomes a belief, the belief becomes reality, yada, yada. So that's one way to look at power. It's not like, oh, I'm up here in a blue suit, or whatever the saying is for that. It's sovereignty. It's yeah. But another great, we could do a whole podcast on power, on mirroring, on
even sovereignty. I mean, that's not a run-of-the-mill term that you're going to hear on every street corner. The notion of self-sovereignty, or community sovereignty, or group sovereignty. When you start adding other words to the words that we're talking about, like power of self, power of group, power of commissions, all these sort of things, they add something else to the word, but the word itself stands on its own. And sovereignty is one of those ones that it's got 4 or 5 elements that need to be present in order for sovereignty to be occurring. And it's the same thing with power. That's implicit to power is having the responsibility and the accountability to appropriately, use it or not, and sovereignty is the same thing. You cannot be irresponsible and be sovereign. They don't go together, right?
oh, you're asking. Well, I would say that's up for the observer, but in our discussion, yes,
Yeah.
it wouldn't make, it would cause resistance, and that person would eventually unfold and realize, oh, maybe it wasn't actually as sovereign as I thought. You could almost even intertwine, or you could almost swap sovereign for conscious. It's
Right.
really what meaning is going by. You mentioned, you could say one thing and then try to explain it to somebody using all the tools and all the structures, all the language, all the metaphors, maybe even use your body, and it would appear, oh, this is adding value to it. But from that other person's and I can't verify this, but from the other person's consciousness, they have a gnosis of what they are trying to use these structures and these words to help tell about. In fact, there was a time I was following a metaphysical leader, and I was still heavy on medicine at the time, and so I was going through like a hermit stage, and on the brink of psychosis, which actually did happen. She helped me through that. And one of the things before the episode hit, she was talking to me about something I was just trying to express to her. And I remember it so clearly because I was trying to explain to her that the more I try and talk about it, the less I'm actually saying what I'm talking about. And that ended up leading into a sign that I was very ungrounded at that moment, which caused the metaphysical psychosis as I understand it now. All that to say, you're beyond accurate with that. There are plenty of other beings on this planet, humans included, that communicate without the use of words. We still use vibration of sound. We use vibration from our bodies, from what we see. So just expand your view on what is someone, you're looking at somebody, and you could say no 10 different ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just the tone of the no. Sometimes it's, is one of your eyebrows up? No, very similar stuff.
Yeah. Yes, it's kind of a remarkable thing that we attempt to do, and most of us think we do it pretty well. The whole notion of communication, because at the level of human being, communication occurs when what is being sent is being received and can be sent back in the exact same fashion. It's the ultimate mirroring. And the mirroring in that case is not a person's being, but it's a person's conveying in language an idea. And the idea is the important thing, not the words, And I think people sometimes get hung up on words and they don't get the communication job done because the idea never really gets across there. And I was kind of thinking about that when you were saying, you're doing all these things, using all the tools, all the what, and you might just be pissing them off, There's like, you're taking an awful long time to get this out, Bill. Would you please just get to the point, But the point really comes down to that notion of, first of all, be the change you want to see in the world. I think that's one of the neat things. All the great orators always stole their lines from somebody else, and Mahatma Gandhi is no different. And to his credit, he's the one who's remembered for saying that. But I'm sure Stoics said it, thousands of years ago. All that said, while you're in the process of explaining, most of the time you're making it up as you go along, unless you've taken the time to be the teacher. When you learn to teach, that means you learn to express it in other people's language. And when you can express in the language of the listener, that's communication. You've gone through a process of translating it into terms, idioms, maybe even you're not using timestamps that come from your years, but are contemporary to the people that you're speaking with. So, for instance, if I went in and was going to talk to a whole bunch of 5-year-olds right now, I wouldn't get very far asking them how much they liked Romper Room, or how much they like Captain Kangaroo. I wouldn't even get that far asking them how much they like Teletubbies. There's other stuff going on, and even Peppa Pig is getting to be, like old school. So when it comes right down to it, the challenge to somebody who's interested in communicating, as opposed to being a speaker, if you will, the communicators, I think, are the ones who get a return gig. They're the ones who get listened to again, who get called up on a Saturday evening when somebody's having a struggle and they just want to let it go for a minute or two. It's the communicators, not the great sayers, if you will. Does that make sense?
It does. It's a lot coming in on that. That's a powerful statement. Our dear friend Jan Jeremias, I was tuning in with her and Mary J. And I want to get a t-shirt of this, but it says the saying is teach to learn.
Yep.
You know, as much as we scratch that, you know, Florence Savelle Shin has even a saying that no man is your friend, no man is your enemy, but every man is your teacher. That sounds a lot like communication instead of, you know, being not that viral content creators are, you know, not this. I believe there's a spectrum of all things here, but you can obviously tell when someone is almost bringing forth that communication, or if somebody is almost applying for recognition or applying for validation of something. You know, I often I'll want to talk in more depth situations about things, but if anybody tunes into what I've got going on, that's been a big realization in the last couple of weeks, is that those things aren't going anywhere. And I'm much more comfortable, just since we threw out the terms, communicating it. And what needs to come through will come through. You know, I even have an affirmation that I honor my depth and respond with discernment. My presence is enough, and the impact unfolds in divine timing. And a lot it was behind that when I wrote that down in my journal. And part of it was because I know of the depth that I carry. In fact, when you first interviewed me on your other podcast, one of the questions was about what people often misunderstand about me. And that hands down is the number one. You know, I can come across very easy of a or fluid of a communicator. Part of that was people pleasing, sure, and almost dismiss the depth that I carry. Um, and I've gotten to a point where it's so much more fulfilling to just honor the depth. That doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean I have to script out everything I'm going to say. In the same way, we apply this to other people in our life. You know, our children, our loved ones. We want almost to share the script that we hold so dearly too. Look at all this depth I have, and taking that empowerment away for them, being in the moment, present with it. Are you communicating fully? The other day was my best friend's mother, or my nana rather, her birthday. And I had all this great intention behind it, what I was doing, and it didn't work out. I wanted to print it out on this nice piece of paper. And so on the first part of that, the words and the delivery of it did not add value necessarily. How do I want to intertwine this? The idea, the sentiment behind that I was making. So I made a poem for her. What I was doing, that's what wanted to be conveyed. Not what is the message, what's coming through, how is she interpreting it? It didn't print out. Will she accept it? Yada yada. So that's side one. Inside two, doing this grand work, if you will. What I was able to then uncover by allowing it and almost like surrendering to it was I went and delivered the poem. And it was a magical moment versus, let me give you this card, give you a hug, and hope you read this and like it. I stood there and I delivered it. And with that, the words did not, I promise you to her, the words did not matter as much as the communication that I brought forward with it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Who you were being was an extraordinary human being, really honoring her by showing up, you know?
77.
And, yeah. Good Lord. Young gal, huh? So, yeah, you want to make a difference with people, show up.
Show up.
You know, and that's what I was left with when you were saying sometimes the best part of communication is being the getter, you know, is just absorbing and resonating with the words that are coming in and allow them to land where they're going to land and deliver the feeling, deliver the emotional gift, deliver whatever else is coming along with it, as opposed to just hearing the words. And if you stop and think about, you know, great orators, you don't have to hear those words uh, orally. You can hear them. That was AU.
No, I get it. You know, even Mary Morrissey, she talked about one time she was at some event and she was watching a gentleman on stage and she took in the message and everything. And afterwards, she was in like a brunch bar or something like that. And, light conversation going on. And a lady turned to her. I might be butchering the story, but it's principle here. A lady turned to her and asked her, was making a comment about something the speaker talked about. And Mary Morse, she just told it from her lens, from her translation, if you will, of the words. And the communication behind it, though, hit the woman. Well, not hit the woman, but it it translated. And the lady stopped Mary and was like, oh, and that's my nana's birthday, name, by the way, Mary. But anyway, stopped the lady and was like, I get, I get it now. I heard that. And Mary was kind of took aback because she was like, I just repeated what this guy said. And the lady was like, no, but I just heard it now.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear you talking about. There's deeper things going on. You can hear anything you say anyway is going to be interpreted not only by yourself but somebody else. Why waste all the energy and trying to control that? Even your own interpretation, let it be, and theirs is theirs. There's a good saying, what other people think of me is none of my business.
I usually hear people saying that to other people about them. What other people think of you, Austin, is none of your business. And the neat part of that is if you say that to yourself, what's the limiting factor? What's the permission? What's the gift? I love it. I mean, whatever perspective you choose to garner empowerment out of your life's history, anything you want to say to yourself that makes you feel good in the moment and gives you a little spring in your step. I mean, I know people that before they get on a telephone call with somebody that they really don't want to talk to, they will stand and jump up and down for a full minute just to get themselves into the shape where they can actually sit down and be present enough to have that conversation. And you're familiar with the hero's pose, right? For 2 minutes, you stand erect with your feet apart, and either with your arms out to the side, or you can do something else where you hold them up over your head like this, or you do something like this for 2 full minutes. You get yourself into a posture of being out there, of sending energy out there. And then you sit down and you talk to anybody you want to. It's just so easy. It all just flows. And the neat part of being in a communication, as opposed to a conversation, is the conversation, things get said, but in communication, things get understood.
Mm.
And that's the neat part of being around other people is, you can talk to be heard, or you can talk, to be felt, or you can be talk to be gotten. When a human being gets another human being, it's, in my personal view, it's magic, it's sacred, and it's wonderful.
Resonance.
Yeah. There's some kind of a giving away of your essence in that. And I think that also, having that essence be received and assimilated into the person that you're speaking with, and you can see a bodily shift when that occurs. There's something changes in that moment, and that's transformational, in my humble opinion.
Yes. Yeah. Reminds me of integrity. So, and integrity and the ripple effect. The power lies in you owning that integrity is your moment. So an example, you open the door, you hold the door open for somebody, or you're driving down the road and somebody's on the side of the road. You pick them up. Somebody you give $1 to, whatever integrity, nice gesture, kind gesture, I should say. the integrity part where you maintain your power, but then also afford them opportunity for empowerment is in the ripple effect. You open the door for somebody out of integrity, not for a thank you, not for somebody at the gas station looking at you and acknowledging you. That communication that's happening in that moment can shift that person's entire day, could save someone's life even. And it's not necessarily there for you to measure what the ripple effect is. And that's where the power lies, is that was your moment. That was your moment to be kind. Even though you were giving the kindness away, it's actually kindness for yourself.
I love what you're saying. And the definition of transformation isn't just changing form beyond essence. There's also a requirement that in the event of a transformation, it's validated in that the deliverers of the transformation are themselves transformed. Not something you're giving to somebody. It's a co-creation. And one gets goosies, we all get goosies, and it's a wonderful, we're back. Transformation again is not it's not the thing to learn how to do. It's something that you have
learn how to be.
Yes, you have to, like you said, surrender to the big change, as opposed to religiously holding on to who you think you are. That little bit right there. The Buddhists feel that the greatest single challenge is the one of becoming attached to self, and the one you become attached to is not it's not a proper pronoun. It's a small s. The one you're actively working on, the one you're pursuing, the one that you're inventing in the moment, the one that you're creating and transforming to, is with a capital S. It is a Michelangelo work of art. And for those people who have the training, have spent the time really looking into this art form, the one of personal best not being something that happens accidentally, but something that comes out of discipline and rigor, comes out of constantly being able to set down one set of tools and pick up a whole brand new set with no loss of power. And when you get to the point where you can interchange anything that goes on in your life, you no longer have a vocabulary of 4 or 5 neat stories to tell everybody the first time you meet them. And then when you meet them the second time, you tell them the same 5 stories all over again. The neat part of communication is 2 authentic human beings genuinely engaged in the moment, being fully present and exchanging whatever they got.
Beautiful analogy.
I love having these kinds of conversations. And I know that, in a group setting, sometimes people will ask me to say what I just said again. And I will say I cannot, because I don't listen to me when I speak. What I'm saying is far less important than the reaction and the knowing receipt that I get on the other side looking back at me. So all of that is to say, somewhere along the way, actually, when I used to public speak years ago, I had somebody who I always kept with me. There was always a promise keeper. And this was an individual, while I'm in the middle of engaging conversations, with people, and discussing something that maybe none of us knew anything about, but we're postulating, postulating, and all of that, to get to a place where we could design a paradigm to imagine a new kind of conversation. So you can't take a printed page that's already got something on it and do anything other than change it. There's no room to create where there already exists something there. So sometimes in conversation, you have to create a clearing where we've leveled the field and there's no more language that's necessary. And sometimes that can be achieved through silence. or it can be achieved another way, or it could just be achieved by saying something like, well, okay, that was good. Now let's try something new.
Yes. Yes, and absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. A lot of cookies and nuggets.
Yeah. So what's the point of that? The point of that is that you become what you choose to become by designing it ahead of time and then pursuing it. You know, and mostly with a lot of failure to begin with, but failures with notes, failures with maybe you try this. And in a authentic conversation, it doesn't come in a post-mortem, it comes while you're speaking, where you take back something that you said, change gears entirely mid-sentence and go with another direction. And some people are concerned that that's not being a good speaker. But I'm going to tell you right now, the best speakers that I know of do that crap all the time. They're just genuinely right where they are. They get lost every once in a while. And then the really good ones can laugh at themselves while they're doing it and bring, the listener along, if they happen to be speaking to a large group of people, or bring the other persons in the conversation along. But if you think about everything that we started out talking about, the notion of empowerment, wouldn't a very fundamental definition of that word be helpful? So for some, yeah,
Yeah, I would even upgrade to maybe a whole statement and say empowerment. Well, you could replace a lot of sentences with this, saying, "This is my remembrance." Empowerment is remembering who we truly are. The big E and the little E and the big E, the small G and the big G. They're not necessarily, there's that necessary. It is a paradox, but, and I say but intentionally, they're also not a paradox. We perceive that we're these small things, and we're remembering that we're really the big thing, remembering that we're small thing. Anyway, that could be a whole thing, because it is very hard to maybe go about explaining the paradox in that way. But we all get to experience what that means to us. We're all remembering who we are.
Yes. And I think really what you're pointing to is in a committed human being's existence, there is a striving to achieve a state of having glimpsed answers and been able to gain enough insight from those answers to be able to create them for another person or recreate them for another person because they had an impact on us. So the answer to that is that every time you get to the point where you think you can define what the ideal is, and you're satisfied with that for the moment, the next thought is, no, it's not that.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing for human beings to do, is to give up their need for absolutism and allow the structure of what's going on around them to be the raw materials for what the answer is today.
Yes.
Is in this moment, which is, more like the sentence, a truth as distinct from a truth is one that exists in the moment that it's being spoken. The same thing for the word possibility. A possibility, as distinct from a possibility, exists only in the moment that it's being spoken. So if you're talking about a future as distinct from the future, it only exists in the moment that it's being spoken. So if you're not talking about something It's not present any longer. So if you want something to be present now, you got to bring it up. It's like not like people remember their place from where we were last Thursday. Other things have happened, right? So the point of all of that in terms of demonstrating how human beings would much rather just say future's going to be really bad, man.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
one thing to throw in there about remembrance that just kind of came to me now is, uh, remember. I feel like when we use the word remembering, we're thinking linearly, it's behind us. But you have to realize, multidimensional lens here, that remembering is also on a linear basis. It's also forward. Now it's much more than that, but keep that in mind also. And I also heard this. Actually, I think it was, what's that billionaire's guy's name? Elon Musk. Someone was doing some kind of interview. Back, I don't know. I just came across it, but he had a great point that stuck with me, and he said something along the lines of, the universe is the answer. So the question is, what are we asking it?
Yes. Yeah, it's a slightly different version of the Aristotle quote, but the point is the power is in the question. So what is the question? And if you think about how human beings typically operate, we're all looking for answers.
Answer, yes, that's what I'm saying. We are the power. That's why when you afford somebody to realize that they are the power, that's empowerment. That communication of, I'm power, you're power, this is all power. Without we use words to help guide us there, but it's communication, like you keep referring to. It's more of a resonance, of a knowing. How think of a baby. No one, you go up and do a funny face to a baby. Sometimes they'll make a funny face back. There was nothing you ever showed them before or discussed. You show them something and they don't like. Now, where did that baby learn or remember something they've never seen before? Just a food for thought. They do it naturally. They do it naturally, but they're asking questions. What is this? Is the stove really hot? Someone said it was hot. They used this with these words and these structures and tell me, I'm gonna question. I'm gonna go find out for myself. That's their empowerment. You can teach them the what. This is hot, but you can't teach them the how. That's their power to experience that. It doesn't mean dismiss them and be like, oh yeah, go touch it. You still you afford that power to them as well.
Yes. Yeah, there's a good strong correlation between the word experience and consequence.
Hard love.
Life is full of consequences, but they're a result of risking. What I really appreciate about the whole notion and where we spun off to and come back to, the neat part is that empowerment is being free to fully act the way you are coming from authentically inside of yourself. Where being disempowered is shutting that down, it's cramping it. And sometimes, I mean, if we can just distill this down to like one simple Bill-ism is that if you're not in a space of an empowerment, which means there's something calling you to act and you're not capable of doing it right at the moment, you're disempowered. You're probably operating to the wrong question. You may need a better question. It may be as simple as that. If what you're acting on and what's driving you is the question, what if XYZ, and it's over and over and over, you might have to just give that question up and see if you can come up with a better one. And 9 out of 10 times, that's all it takes for somebody who's completely broken down is, I'm sure my life is over. I'm going to fail this test tomorrow, and then every once in a while they get to the point and they go, well, what if I don't? Well, that seems to be a better question because it's at least painting you a life raft, right?
And you'll always have a new question. Let's say you ran with and were like, oh, What if I fail the test? I think I'm going to fail the test. And you go in and you fail the test. The thing to put your awareness on right here in this explanation or analogy is go back to when you were thinking, there's nothing beyond me having that question. But guess what? Anytime you put an awareness on what question am I asking now? Guess what? In any other moment other than that moment, you're gonna have a new question. Maybe it's very similar. Maybe you keep repeating it, but it's different. And then the thing to point out is maybe consider that the question might be different upcoming for you. If that's something that you're not able to think of it that way, maybe.
I think that's a pretty brilliant place for us to kind of draw this session to a conclusion. Do you have any last minute nuggets that you would like to draw from what we've talked about today, or anything else you'd like to talk about?
This has been a very fruitful conversation, as it always is. I think that we left a lot for the audience and ourselves to kind of settle with and unpack here. So I'm honored and blessed that you invited me on again, Bill.
It's my pleasure. I got to tell you, Austin, you're one of my favorite people to shoot holes in the sky with. There's no question about it. The type of play that you and I have, with language is pretty great. So I'm going to thank you again, and I'm looking forward to having you back real soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, before we go, I always have a request of my folks at home and now also of you. Would you please, after we part company, reach out to somebody in your life, maybe more than one, maybe 2, 3, who knows, but send them a text message, a phone call, a letter, and let them know that they matter to you and that your life works because they're in it. And if they ever need you, all they need to do is to call. And that's all I've got for this week. Bye-bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.